So my initial impression of this movie was that the makers of this obviously saw John Wick and thought that's a pretty cool movie and we want to make a movie like that. So they did. But then I realized it's actually written by Derek Kolstad, who actually wrote John Wick. Which makes a whole lot of sense considering this is basically pretty much the same movie. At least as close to the same movie you can get without it being an actual remake. I mean, the similarities are so obvious that making the comparison becomes mandatory. From the protagonist to his backstory, to the thing that sets him off, to the action, to the basic structure and flow of the story, to the car and the Russians. I mean, there's even a cute animal involved. You could not make them more similar if you tried to, while still maintaining some semblance of separation. But the thing that this has going for it is that it's still very well made. From the very opening scene that just found a way to get me on board immediately, to the great soundtrack, to the snappy and effective editing, to the cool action sequences, and the story and the main character that worked and were compelling enough to keep me on board. The pacing is also very tight and it doesn't waste time on, well, basically anything unnecessary. It all just works. I had no real issues with this at all. There's nothing that I didn't like about it. If I look at this in a vacuum as a standalone movie without any context, which I can't really do because a movie called John Wick already exists. And in that context, this comes off as derivative to the point of being more or less a rip-off. Now granted, a very, very well made rip-off that was still thoroughly enjoyable. And if this did something better than the movie it's clearly based on, it's probably the fact that the protagonist is a family man and his relationship with his daughter is great. They didn't have a lot of scenes together, but the ones they had were fantastic. In fact, I would say that Bob Odenkirk in the main role is probably the biggest difference between the two movies. He just comes across as a slightly more of an everyday guy and more relatable, I guess. And that just added one more layer and element to this that I think did bring it up a notch overall. But other than that, I don't really know what to say about this. I feel like I'm just repeating myself. Because objectively, this is a good movie and I thoroughly enjoyed it, but at the same time, I just could not help but to be constantly reminded of how similar this is to John Wick. It was just so blatant and in your face that it was impossible for me to ignore. And in an alternative universe, I would have probably given this maybe even a 9. However, as it stands, I can't really give it much more than a solid 7. Boop. But does that mean I would recommend it? Sure, if you're a fan of action movies, go for it. And if you're not, probably skip this one or do whatever you feel like. After all, I'm nobody. But hey, what are your thoughts on this? Have you seen it? Did you like it? Let me know. And if you enjoyed the video, maybe give it a thumbs up or sub to the channel because that would be fantastic.